So the big tax question is this: how do wealthy people keep their money working for them when selling their business, real estate, or other highly appreciated assets without paying hundreds of thousands to millions of dollars in tax? What if we, as business and real estate owners who have poured blood, sweat, and tears to growing our wealth, and who didn't hire expensive tax attorneys and CPAs to map out an exit strategy, knew their secrets? Instead of recreating the wheel, why can't we just model the way they deferred 30 to 50% in tax, paid off debt, funded their next business dream, and most importantly, leave a financial legacy to give to the causes we believe in most? What if their secrets weren't complicated at all, and you just need a guide who is a few steps ahead of you? That is the question, and this podcast will give you the answers. My name is Brett Swarts, and welcome to Capital Gains Tax Solutions. Welcome to the Build It to Billions podcast, where we guide successful entrepreneurs and investors on their journey from millions to billions. We believe the key to scaling and compounding your wealth and life starts every single day with a mindset and practice of stewardship over ownership and applying billionaire biblical principles. Our ultimate goal is to help you scale and compound your wealth and life so you can give more or all of it away and help MVPs. My name is Brett Swarts. Each and every episode, we're joined by the world's top entrepreneurs, millionaires, or billionaires, and they share their secrets, wisdom, and insight with us so we can all level up, make a bigger impact. I'm excited about our next guest. He's a successful entrepreneur who scaled his last company to 200 plus employees across 12 countries, then executed a strategic exit to a $4 billion competitor using a disciplined, repeatable framework. That discipline was forged not only in the boardroom, but through the elite endurance challenges, including 17 Ironman triathlons and high-altitude mountaineering expeditions, including Mount Everest. He's a best-selling author of Built to Finish and a keynote and TEDx speaker and host of the Built to Finish podcast. Today, he advises founders and CEOs on building companies intentionally designed not to just grow, but to finish strong. Please welcome to the show with me, Mr. Steven Pivnick. Steven, how are you doing?
Brett, great. Thank you so much for having me on the show.
Absolutely. For our listeners, get to know you for the first time, maybe give us a little bit more about your story and your current focus.
Sure. So I basically, like you mentioned, I built my last company to over 200 employees. It was a software company, so IT focused. I won't bore your audience to tears with what we did. It was super nerdy, but there was a great demand for it worldwide. So scaled it across the world, really. 12 countries. We had most of the Fortune 5,000 customers around the world were our customers, so we focused on targeting the biggest companies out there. And our number one competitor, which was a $4 billion software company, got sick and tired of losing to us, so they ended up acquiring us after we hit I think $40 million in sales was too much for them to compete with.
That's incredible. And before we dive into a $1+ billion founders exits, which you help founders to exit well and to grow in all areas of life. And we'll talk about an amazing trip and opportunity for some investors to consider for Ecuador that's coming up here. Before we dive into all that, I'm kind of curious, Steven, growing up, who was he, right? And maybe what was the one or two superpowers or gifts you believe you were given, and how does that help how you help and bless people today?
Yeah, I mean, I really, I come from an immigrant family. We came over to this country when I was 3 years old. We immigrated from what is now the Ukraine. It was the Soviet Union back in 1972, which is when we left. And I think the biggest gift I got was from my father. And I just learned an incredible work ethic and learned how to deal with the grind, right? We came over with, almost no money in our pockets, no place to live. They didn't have a place to work. I'm not sure they actually knew how they were going to survive, but it couldn't be worse than what they were facing in the Soviet Union. So they took the leap of faith, and I learned how to grind it out just by watching my father and his work ethic.
What was the moment when your dad, or that it kind of sunk in that oh wait, mom and dad are different? Because when you're in it, you're kind of like, it's just what you're used to. And then you look around and you're like, wait, not everyone wants or is hungry as we are, or is work as hard as we are. But was there a moment that it kind of clicked in your teenage years or something?
Yeah, I mean, that's exactly when it happened, around the teenage years, where I noticed, I went to an incredibly ritzy school because of an immigrant scholarship. Everybody else was super wealthy there. I was the poorest kid in school. And I noticed, them taking incredibly long vacations and their parents not working weekends and them having a little bit more of, leisure in their life. And we didn't have that. So, my parents had to, work, tooth and nail to put food on the table and to give us, what we never wanted for anything, but we definitely didn't have the luxuries that all of my peers in school did. So I noticed a huge disparity there.
Awesome. Well, let's with that in mind and that spirit of mind of hard work and how to deal with the grind. Let's talk about the best wisdom or secrets that you've learned from founders who've exited. Right. I mean, you've been either helped or a part of yourself over $1 billion plus worth of exits. So what's like the number one thing that you found if you want to have a successful exit?
Yeah, I mean, there's so many that come to mind. At the top of the list would be, first of all, corporate governance and being able. I call it ABC. People refer to ABC as always be closing deals. I refer to ABC as always be closing your books, right? So there needs to be a very, very disciplined corporate governance process in place in order to close your books on a timely and accurate measure. Because when you're going to be going through an exit process, or even if you're looking for a new credit line or looking for new partnerships, outside parties are going to be requesting your financials and your books regularly. And the quicker you can get them produced on a monthly basis, the higher the impression you're going to leave with whoever is requesting them versus I'll get back to you, and that next response is 2 or 3 weeks later, which is pretty typical in the middle market, unfortunately. So corporate governance is huge. The second is management team and a leadership team, right? Other companies buy, sure they buy products, sure they buy the potential of a company, but they're really buying teams. So they need to be incredibly impressed with the team that you have in place that's going to be coming over with the transaction. And what buyers hate are sacred cows. And we all have them, right? As entrepreneurs, we're super loyal to the folks that have started with us from day one, but they may actually hurt a valuation if a buyer determines that they may be a sacred cow that's there because they're your uncle or your cousin or your brother, things like that. So that's going to hurt you. The last is a competitive advantage. There needs to be what I like to call a very large moat around your company from a product or service perspective that's going to be hard to replicate. Right? If somebody's coming in and they express interest in buying your company, but they see that a competitor can easily recreate what you have relatively quickly, then that's going to hurt valuation as well. So the larger the moat and the greater the differentiation, which is harder to replicate, the better the entrepreneur will be in getting maximum valuation.
Okay, got it. So you got to have a big moat for the product or service and competitive advantage. You got to have a great team, right? And you got to also have clear, clean, accurate books that are timely and attainable. And I think without the numbers, right, it's hard to know, if you're aligned or not with where you're going, right? And how to even get there, because what are you basing on? If you're not basing upon math and the numbers, what they're telling you, then it's something different, right? So I think, that actually sets you up for success, just having clear numbers and understanding what they are. I just picture Shark Tank all the time and they're like, okay, what are your numbers? And obviously the people that don't know the numbers or are uncertain or unclear about them, they quickly lose interest and confidence
100%.
in the founder.
There's no quicker way to lose credibility if you don't know the numbers like the back of your hand at a pretty detailed level, because folks that are acquiring companies, especially if the CEO is an integral part of the company and they want to go forward with the deal, they want to make sure that he or her has their pulse on the books and understand where the numbers are coming from, and more importantly where they're heading and why.
Yep, there it is. Let's keep going here. So what else? What other wisdoms or thoughts? I recently attended a conference and it talked about basically finding like a value gap between where a company is best in class versus where you're at today, and looking at these major drivers, talking about people and processes, right, and management team and all of these things, and figuring out like what's best in class and what's the gap to get there, and then also how involved does the founder need to be in it. And if they're too involved or need to be too involved, obviously it's lowering, it's increasing the key man risk, and it's lowering the valuation because that person needs to stay there. So kind of in that thought, or that kind of framework, what have you found the biggest value movers that are just low-hanging fruit for founders that should be working on it today?
Yeah, you just hit the nail on the head. Now, I was going to go there before you teed it up. Founder dependency is massive, right? If there's a huge founder dependency, that's going to hurt valuation. And when I got serious about selling my company, I actually put a 3-year plan in place to prove to any acquirer that I was no longer integral to the running of the company. So I did that by planning to bring in a CEO to replace me. So I did that first by hiring a COO with the intention of promoting them to CEO if and when the time was right. Well, and I was going to give it a year. Well, in my case, it took me 90 days to figure out that I found the right person, and I'm ready to give over the keys to my baby to him. So within 90 days, I promoted myself to executive chairman, and I started climbing more mountains, started racing more Ironmans, and he started running my company on a day-to-day basis, and it worked out swimmingly. When we finally went into due diligence for the sale of my company, I introduced myself, I introduced my team, and I said, this is the last you're going to hear from me until we close, because my team is capable of answering 120% of anything you throw at us.
Okay, it's incredible. I love it. By the way, you can learn more about Steven by going to his website. I'm going to spell the last name for you, but it's Steven, and then it's Pivnik.com, StevenPivnick.com, where he is a speaker, he's a podcast host, he's an author, and he's given us wisdom, and you can learn more wisdom about how to scale and how to have large exits in a meaningful way. So, okay, that's great. What's the next one? What's the next one that you say, okay, besides replacing yourself, putting a plan in place, hiring that COO, that CEO, and getting that, proven before you go to market, right? Because I think that's, if you're having to try to have a talk about it, right? That means probably you're not really, out of it. But if you can literally say, hand it off to the M&A advisors and the potential buyers and say, talk to my team, they have it all here. I'm going to go somewhere for a couple months, and hopefully you guys come back with your pencils sharpened, knowing that we are best in class, and that I left. I'm not dependent on the company, right? But I'm still obviously engaged. So that's a big one. What's maybe the next big one that kind of comes to mind that helped you to get a higher valuation?
Yeah, the next one is to make sure that trickles down. I mean, having a powerhouse executive team is really important, but you need to have a really deep bench as well, right? So there needs to be a very well thought out and documented succession plan for every single one of your leaders, because executive leadership, it represents risks to acquirers, right? Because the executive leaderships, there's no guarantee that they're going to stay on, right? Obviously, it all depends on the situation. There's some situations where the entire team will stay on and will be incentivized to stay on. There's other situations where they may not, or it may be up to them. So the acquirer wants to know that there's depth within the organization from a human resource perspective, so that if he or she, let's say if the CFO leaves, they want to make sure that the head of finance can easily take over quickly. In addition to individuals, there needs to be a very properly thought out process of documenting SOPs. Now, you don't need to go overboard and document every single process that the company has, because there's hundreds, if not thousands of them. But the key processes from product development, product support, product implementation, consulting services, et cetera, those need to be documented and up to date. So in the event that somebody does leave, a procedure can be followed and can be taken up by whomever is remaining.
Mm-hmm. Okay, excellent. So the ability to properly have a succession plan for key leaders, and really important, not just the not just the owner or the owners, but all of the key leaders have a deep bench. That makes sense. And then the ability to document the key SOPs for the different departments. Okay, great. Let's keep going. What else haven't I asked you so
far?
Yeah,
another one is a cap table. I mean, a lot of middle market companies have an incredibly complicated cap table, and that's something that deserves a lot of attention years before the actual exit event occurs, because sometimes it takes years to clean it up. You'll have original employees, you'll have relatives, you'll have ex-partners that are no longer active or productive. You may have previous board members. There's a whole bunch of folks that have a piece of the pie, and everybody here will be crawling out of the woodwork when they get wind that there's an exit event happening. So you want to get in front of that as much as possible. And like I said, sometimes it'll take years to do that. So, and it's incredibly important, because that shareholders represent risk, and acquirers want a clean cap table. They want to know that Uncle Bob isn't going to be coming in from Cleveland and demanding a whole bunch of money when the transaction closes.
So backing up, right? For a founder who's saying, I haven't given up ownership yet, or I haven't done that, but maybe they feel like they need to do that to get to a different level. How do you balance, attracting and retaining great talent with not giving up too much equity of your company, and how do you know the difference?
So there's absolutely nothing wrong with stock options, and I'm a huge fan of giving out stock options versus actual stock, right? Giving out stock is easy, getting back stock is really hard, versus, and the reward perspective, the financial reward to the actual holder can be very similar from a stock option perspective. So in the event of a change of control or a transaction, an acquisition, a merger, et cetera, they get this almost 99% of the same financial benefit without the owner carrying the risk of actually stock being distributed. So a huge fan, and nothing wrong with stock options. I had close to 10% of my company distributed via stock options, and it was super, super clean. Very straightforward formulas. Everybody knew what they were going to get paid. When the transaction closed, they got theirs, and it was really clean.
Okay, I love that. And I also heard what to call like phantom stock, and then like phantom stock. You want to explain the difference between the two, yeah. But what do you know about phantom stock, and so people understand the difference?
Yeah, I'm not a tax accountant, so I'm not going to claim to be an expert on this, but they basically achieve the same exact purpose, right? They give the holder the ability to get the financial reward that, quote unquote, stock would give somebody after a transaction occurs. It could be stock options, it could be phantom stock, it could be stock appreciation rights. There's like at least 5 different avenues that you can take, or flavors of phantom stock, and you'd really have to talk with a tax attorney to. And an acquisition attorney to figure out which one is best for your specific scenario and the growth plan ahead.
Yeah, and I guess that one of the ones I heard of is basically a form of phantom stock is only while you're still there if the company exits. But if the company doesn't exit, the stock goes back into the company. So and it may not even be called phantom stock, but it's like a form of that. So, and I was like, I never heard of that quite put that way. Okay, so let's keep going here. Maybe some of the biggest mistakes you're seeing. I mean, is AI happening right now, right?
Yeah.
There's a lot changing in the world. What's some of the the biggest mistakes you're like, wow, like if I could talk with the founder who's building a company and is looking to scale it, what are some of the common themes you're seeing that are mistakes that people can be looking out for right now?
Yeah, I mean, there's probably a very, very small percentage of companies that aren't going to be impacted by AI, and the improvements that we're seeing are just around everything AI. So if somebody isn't taking it seriously, they're doing themselves a serious disservice, right? They need to see exactly what role AI is going to play currently in their current product set, in their current services set, in their current go-to-market strategy, and even in the development of their own employees, and figure out a game plan on how to address it today, and more importantly, a game plan on how to continuously monitor it, because the technology around AI is changing quicker than any technology has ever changed. So not only do you need to figure it out for today, you need to figure out how you're going to monitor it and adapt to it on a go-forward basis. And it's literally just mind-boggling, the rate of change right now. And it just, like I said, it needs to be, there almost needs to be like a chief AI officer position created for every company to address what I just said.
I couldn't agree with you more. I mean, we were chat GPT for a while, and now we're moving all over to cloud co-work and just kind of walking away from chat and transferring over, right? And just think about that, that's happened in just the last, in the last 60 days or so. Just how much it's come, how far it's come. It's incredible stuff. Got it. All right, let's talk about mistakes that founders make, to not do planning for capital gains tax or estate tax planning that they can do at the exit. It's something that we're passionate about here at Capital Gains Tax, which is from our company. But I'm curious, what are some of the things that you have seen that you feel like are a helpful approach to this? Because it is a momentum event in the positive, or potentially financially in the negative if you don't do proper planning. So what are your thoughts on proper capital gains tax solution planning?
I mean, similar to my comment on cleaning up the cap table, the planning needs to start years in advance, because a lot of the tax strategies, at least the ones that I'm familiar with, need to start being implemented years ahead of the transaction. Because when you put in tax saving strategies, and you probably agree with this, if it's too close to the actual transaction date, there's a good chance a large transaction gets audited regardless. If the IRS sees, tax strategies implemented, 30, 60, 90 days before the actual transaction, that's a huge red flag. That's almost going to guarantee, penalties and interest, right? So might as well not do them if it's really close to the transaction. But if you do the right things, 2 to 3 years out, and then there's a potential huge 7 to 8 figure, savings that you can benefit from. And that's one of the many mistakes that I made. I mean, there was my mistakes were on the state level. There could have been much better because we had employees, I think, in like 32 or 35 states. We could have done a better job of tax planning at the state level. And from a federal level, there was a lot of opportunities for me personally to move a chunk of shares of my company into a trust in a much more tax-friendlier state from the one that it was in. But again, that needed to be done years ahead of the transaction. I didn't do it. My bad. 7-figure mistake.
Yeah, and so let's talk. So my favorite answer from my business partner, who's a tax attorney CPA, is it all depends. And you're right. Certain strategies are exactly right, Steven. It has to be done years in advance. One of the more low-hanging fruit ones, especially for like tech companies, check with your CPA, is like a QSBS model that's out there that it just got increased for some of the limits. But once you're above a certain amount of revenue, it eliminates. And those, you need to kind of get to it. You need to become a C Corp, right? So,
Yep.
And that can take years. Exactly. So there's other ones though, if you're not doing a transfer or gifting, right? That you can sell to a trust in exchange for a promissory note. It's kind of like a seller carryback, Steven, right? So if you had a $10 million company in California and you're selling to a buyer who puts $2 million down, you can carry paper for $8 million. That's just an installment sale method. Well, we use that with a trust that doesn't require the years of what we call it seasoning, right? In fact, we have set up lots of our deals at 30, 60, 90 days. It's one of our unique advantages because you're selling it to a third-party trust in exchange for a promissory note, different than just transferring it into like your own trust, your own thing, or for the kids, different things like that. And then we have a second one that there's no limit to the size of it, and it's also a sale, but eliminates the estate tax. Okay. And one of the things I think gets missed as well for founders is when they exit, they're not thinking multiple, 100-year generations, right? They're thinking about the exit and just getting to that number. But the estate tax, if you ever see Yellowstone, that's the entire premise of the show is that Kevin Costner has the land, the $1 billion land in Montana, and bet the daughter's like, Dad, you got to sell the land, otherwise they're going to take the land. He's like, what do you mean, daughter? We're keeping it forever. He's like, well, if they kill you, Dad, the death tax is going to kick in anyways, and they're going to take it anyways, right? And if so it's just catch 22. Well, it's a brutal tax. The stepped up basis doesn't solve for it, but founders have a unique opportunity at the point of exit to eliminate that estate tax and have all that growth be outside the taxable estate. Some of the key things I think founders really want is flexibility with the capital, right? They want to be able to start that next business or buy that investment real estate property or diversify the wealth. And so I think the strategy also has to be super flexible because most founders don't want to be put in a box. It's also important to get that because you don't want to also put into something that basically handcuffs the rest of your life and for the passions you want to do. That kind of defeats the purpose just for tax savings. Like, don't let the tax tail wag like your passion and your next vision, business entrepreneur, so you got to balance all of these things. It's not just the tax, it's also the next season. So talk about that transition of season for founders, right? When their identity is tied to their business, it's tied to the employees they've been working with and been grinding with at war, let's say, a business war for the last, 5 or 10 or 15 years. And all of a sudden they're finding themselves on the other side of that. And they're looking up going, whoa, what am I going to do? Like, I think that's a big piece that gets missed on the personal side of the planning. Steven, what do you think?
No, that's actually a huge part of the personal planning. And like you said, a lot of founders have their entire personal identity, tied into their business, and they don't see themselves separated, from actually being CEO of, XYZ Co. And that also takes a lot of work and a lot of soul searching, right? If you have absolutely no desire or no way of separating yourself, then you're looking for a very, very specific exit. You're looking for a very specific financial transaction, probably from a private equity firm that's going to want to have you stay on as the owner of the company, which, by the way, there's no guarantee that that's going to happen. They can promise that, but that's what you'd be looking for so that you can continue to grow the organization, hopefully with their resources as a partner, and continue to do bolt-on acquisitions until you're flipped. So on the flip side, if you can find, and I highly recommend this, find a way to remove the company from your personal identity, so that you can finally realize the value of what you've created. You've been, spending blood, sweat, and tears, building this thing. It's highly, highly illiquid. Your family and friends have probably suffered because of the concentration of all of your energy, most of your energy into this thing. And you and your family deserve to be rewarded for all of that work via an exit. And that's going to involve removing the company from your personal identity. And there's absolutely nothing wrong with that. So I love Yellowstone, great show. But the fact that he can't give up is just ridiculous. He could have done a million and one things from the $500 million offer that he received.
Yeah, I couldn't agree with you more. By the way, speaking with Steven Pivnick, you can learn more about him by going to stevenpivnick.com, stevenpivnick.com. Let's talk about the book, the podcast, and the upcoming trip for some entrepreneur founders that maybe want to join on this experience to expand and grow and all the things.
Yeah, sure. So the book is called Built to Finish. After I sold my company, so let me backtrack real quick. My midlife crisis when I turned a whopping 40 was to take on endurance sports. I just wanted to become as healthy as possible, and I chose endurance sports as my vehicle to get super healthy. So I started with triathlon, that evolved into ultra marathons, and then moved into mountaineering, and I continued to do all three. My massive goal there was to compete in the Ironman World Championship in Kona, Hawaii. And my business goal was to sell my business. And I achieved both about 12 months apart. So after I did both, I decided to put my journey onto paper. And I compare and contrast my entrepreneurial journey with my endurance sports journey, both culminating in great finishes, right? There's a lot of similarities between entrepreneurship and endurance sports. Planning, preparation, execution, pivots, setbacks, the list goes on and on. So the book is my personal journey with a whole bunch of advice and tips and tricks and lessons learned to basically to get to your finish line, whatever that may be. So I wrote the book, became an Amazon bestseller. I've taken the book to the stage. I love giving keynote speeches, just to inspire audiences to dream big and to set big goals. I have a keynote that was recently published that I recorded. I'm sorry, not a keynote, a TEDx that I recorded at the end of last year, which is growing nicely on YouTube. And also started a podcast by the same name, Built to Finish, where I interview entrepreneurs and audacious goal setters for them to offer advice to listeners and to viewers on dreaming big and going after large goals.
Love it. And talk about Ecuador and the trip and what's happening there.
Sure. So because of my passion for endurance and how endurance ties really, really well into increased skill sets for entrepreneurship, I'm taking a select group of 8 founders on a entry-level mountaineering trip. So I'm partnering with a company that actually took me to Everest, and I'm partnering with them to do a beginner climbing school on a volcano in Ecuador. So no previous experience necessary, but you will leave this expedition with enough training to actually attempt some of the bigger mountains if you really wanted to. And the actual climbing school, which is going to be 9 days in Ecuador, is going to be bookended by one-on-one advisory services to see where you are today from an exit readiness perspective. And by the end of the trip, I'll be able to give you a 1 to 3 year roadmap on the things that are necessary to do in order to get the maximum exit for you and every other stakeholder in your company.
Amazing. Steven Pivnick, everybody. We're going to move to the lightning round. Then we'll wrap it up. Ready for the lightning round? Here we go, Steven. Number one book you've recommended the most in the past year?
Turning Pro.
Excellent. Question number 2. What are you most curious about right now?
I'm curious what it's like at the top of Everest because I climbed it, but I didn't make it to the top, so I'm going back.
Okay, excellent. Question number 3. Number one leadership quote or theme that you strive to live by?
Number one leadership quote. I hope this is being edited, so I got to think about this.
It could be a theme too. It could be a theme, like a theme. Doesn't necessarily have to be an exact quote, but like a theme that a mantra. Yeah.
So I'm a huge fan of basically for leaders to roll up their sleeves and work with their team instead of just telling people what to do. Do as I say, but do as I do as well. So I'm a huge fan of. I was always a hands-on type of leader, and I highly encourage folks to get their hands dirty.
Yeah,
and
I heard it said you can't push a rope, right?
Yeah, exactly.
You can't push a rope.
I like that.
And start pulling. So excellent. Next question. Number one tool that you're using for AI, and what are you using it for?
So on my flight home from visiting my last client in San Francisco last week, I wrote an app. So I used Claude. I have, in addition to the Built to Finish book, I created a Built to Finish journal to help people, journal progress against goals that they're setting. And I'm like, you know what? This journal would be great in app form. So I had a 4.5-hour flight back from San Francisco, wrote an app. It was great. It should be released soon.
It's unbelievable. Yeah, we're moving all over to co-work from ChatGPT right now, and it is just next level amazing. So
it really is.
Keep going here. Last question, really, actually. And after all your success, Steven, helping all the founders you've helped and all the things you've done, how do you best keep a mindset of stewardship over ownership?
Stewardship over ownership. Basically, just paying it forward with my kids, right? Just I'm trying to transfer as much knowledge, as much experience, as many mistakes that I've made to help them avoid the mistakes and capitalize on the things that were done right. So really passing it forward to the next generation.
Hey, Steven Pivnick, it's been more than a pleasure. I'm so grateful to be a part of Brand Builders with you, with Rory Vaden, and be able to expand and make meaningful, content. And that's how we got connected, by the way. We met in Nashville about a year ago, maybe. And I want to encourage you to keep using your incredible gifts of work ethic that your parents passed down to you on that stewardship side of things, and then how to deal with the grind, right? With all the founders you're helping to level up and exit well. For our listeners who want to get in touch with you, one last time, what's the best place for them to find you?
StevenPivnick.com has all of my socials, and I'm the same on every single social media platform. It's at Steven Pivnick, one word.
Perfect. Excellent. And I want to thank you, Steven, again. Also, thank all of our listeners for listening, interviewers, to another episode of the Build to Billions podcast. We're also streaming on Capital Gains Tax Solutions podcast and YouTube channels. And we're on this journey with you to scale from millions to billions so we can give more, all of it away to help MVPs, the most vulnerable people. My name is Brett Swarts. If you do have a big exit coming up or know someone who does, why don't you check out the book, Building a Capital Gains Tax Exit Plan. It's on Amazon. You can check it out there. And we want to encourage you to take action like Steven and I were talking about to plan. You spent 10,000 hours building your business. Why not spend 5 hours building a plan that can have an extra 20 to 50% more working for you in a flexible manner that allows you to be an entrepreneur, to partner with this trust, all tax free, to do next deals, new business. Ours works for Bitcoin, businesses, stock, real estate, any asset of any kind. Just go to capitalgainstaxsolutions.com to get started. Appreciate everyone out there, and we'll talk to you again real soon. Bye now.
You have just listened to another information-packed episode of Capital Gains Tax Solutions with Brett Swarts. We hope you enjoyed today's show and found it helpful. Visit capitalgainstaxsolutions.com to access the show notes and to access more resources. Don't forget to leave a review and join us again next time.